As more and more people find themselves without work, governments will feel the additional pressure. This has already been highlighted in the increase of taxation on the public. More taxation equates to slower growth. As a result, more stimulus will be needed. This cycle will continue and there will be no more market, just control from the few over the many. In any historical similarity, this always ends badly. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Today I've got an interesting set of data that I need to get through. There are so many factors at play here. I'm going to first show you what's happening with not paying rents. This is all to do with the employment scenario. Of course, you've got people that aren't getting money coming in. They're not going to have money to go out. They're not paying their rent. They're not able to pay for their basic necessities. And we have seen all this, documented all of this, and gone through it one step at a time. The food banks, the lineups are crazy. You are witnessing the support that's coming from government at historic highs, and yet still with all of that, they are unable to supercharge this system. So we're going to start with that, and then I want to get into so many different things. I've got information related to Europe, to Canada, and so much more. Let's begin. Las Vegas tops US in rise of apartment tenants not paying rent. As you saw back during the housing crisis, Las Vegas was one that had a big target on its back, that's for sure, because they were building homes literally in the middle of the desert. Subdivisions were getting built up with not a single person interested in buying. That's when you know you've got a bubble. Yes, you can build a bridge to nowhere, but is that really going to help out in the long run? Las Vegas saw the biggest jump in apartment tenants who have stopped paying rent. In September, 10.6% of Vegas tenants missed a rent payment. That was up from 4% a year earlier. For New Orleans, they had the highest overall share of people not paying. That's 12.9%, up from 8.6%. So everyone is experiencing a problem right now, no matter where they live, where people around are not paying their rents, they're not paying their mortgages. I understand there are moratoriums, but for the average person, they are going to continue to pay their bills if they have the money. That is an absolute fact. We know that. But for some people, they do not have the money, so they are taking advantage of this. But at the end of it all, they still have to pay back. It's not as if somebody's going to be left off the hook. No, the landlord wants his money. The bank, the lender, they want their money. And if they don't get it, the economy is going to take such a big beating. It already is. And you know that this could spiral out of control in a very short period of time. There are many people who would say, hey, you know what? Forget about the banks. And I get it. We shouldn't be shedding a tear if they don't get their payments. But that's not what it's about. You have to look at the economic aspect, and it is very clear today. Metro areas with the biggest annual increase in non-paying apartment tenants in September. So you can see on this chart right here, Las Vegas and LA is actually second in line. It's hard to tell from the chart exactly, but it's probably somewhere around that 4 or 5% mark. These numbers might seem low for some people, but understand that it only takes a small percentage to affect the many, especially when we're talking about the debt that's behind it, the derivatives that are behind all of this, and how the system is truly so fragile. Where there is risk, there is fragility, and where there is fragility, I assure you, there will be failure. There's more detail in this article. If you wanted to check it out for yourself, I will include the link in the description, or you can just pause this right here to take a look. Cineworld brings down the curtain on US, UK theaters. 45,000 jobs hit. The world's second biggest cinema chain is fighting a collapse in film release and cinema going. This is definitely big. You know that there are a lot of people that are being directly hit by this, but understand that there is an indirect result as well. They're not the only ones, but certainly the movie theater industry over the next 6 months is going to look a lot different. The cruise industry has obviously seen its fair share of damage recently, and it doesn't look like this is going to get any better, but in Singapore, they've got some different ideas. Singapore Cruises to Nowhere plan sparks fears. Singapore hopes to start cruises to nowhere in a bid to revive its tourism industry, but as you saw earlier in the year, that was quite problematic. It caused a lot of hardship for people who were stuck on these cruise ships, wanted to get off, weren't allowed to get off. It was all over the news. This reminds me of what happened just recently. Qantas Airlines had a flight to nowhere, and to my surprise, it sold out in 10 minutes. So there is obviously a market for it. It's probably a limited market, but this is the desperation of these industries. That's the point I'm trying to make. Toyota's robotic butler will serve you from the ceiling. Users can train it to perform complicated tasks by first demonstrating them in VR. So essentially, this thing could move along the track in the ceiling, bring you your food. The need for humans seems like it is truly declining in a lot of these industries like this. There is so much more automation going in, and the landscape has entirely changed. The problem here, and I see the comments all the time, I see the articles written, well, so what? Just become a coder for AI or design a robot. And that's just not practical for a large percentage of the public. The actual fact is that these robots and automation are coming online faster than people can get trained. It's not happening over a generation. It's happening over a period of 10 years. That's going to leave a lot of people who are in the retail industry and so on without work. Millions of new jobs could be created if governments spend more. That's according to the IMF. Fantastic. Just spend a whole bunch of money and you will create more jobs. Already, the government, let's say the United States, has pumped into the system with their stimulus measures more than they ever have in history. They've created a deficit that is permanent, that will never be resolved. And then you look at what the central bank has done. They've also gone to historic levels. So to suggest that all you've got to do is spend more money and new jobs can be created is just absolute nonsense. What they are clearly not highlighting, and what is truly obvious, is that there is a ceiling in how much you can spend and the actual effect of that spending. I've got a chart to show you in just a second, but essentially, I've said it so many times before, the more you pump into the system, the less you get out of it. And that is an absolute fact. That is a documented fact. I'll show you in a minute. Stephen Roach wrote this article in the Financial Times, and it discusses the end of the dollar. What I do find interesting, not just about this article, but in general, when we discuss the end of the dollar or a new currency system, this is not decided by any one particular country. These are always after a crisis and determined by a supranational entity. Actual countries do not control anything. But wait a minute, I've gone too far, too deep. Let's back it up a bit. Don't want to upset anybody. The US has run a large and persistent current account deficit. And you can see the US current account balance as a percentage of the GDP and what has happened over the years. I know the font is small, but this right here is 2010. So after the financial crisis, this started to rise. But since 2020, essentially, this has started to fall further into the negative once again. There's no possible way that this can ever actually be recovered. We have a shortfall coming in basically everything except the stimulus. That's the funny part. There's a lot to the article, and I'm just giving you a snippet here, but he says a few things in this bottom paragraph. The dollar index fell 33% in real terms, both in the 1970s and the mid-1980s. Another 28% from 2002 to 2011. During those three periods, the net domestic savings rate averaged 4.9% versus minus 1.2% today. And the current account deficit was minus 2.5% of the GDP versus minus 3.5% today. And this is the key right here. With the US having squandered its exorbitant privilege, the dollar is now far more vulnerable to a sharp correction. A crash is looming. You can look at the dollar index as he's talking about here, or you can talk about it in relation to real goods. As far as I'm concerned, that's much more obvious. Okay, so we were talking about that issue previously related to how much they pump in, how much you get out. Got a couple charts to show you from real investment advice. Debt growing faster than the GDP. I think it's pretty clear which is which, but that orange line is the debt growth. The blue is the real GDP growth. These have diverged considerably for the last few years, of course, but it has gone haywire just recently. There is no possible way that we can grow out of this, and that goes for the US. That goes for Canada. That goes for the UK, Australia, and everywhere else. We have to face that. So if you look at the trajectory, you can then sort of predict what's going to happen after. Real GDP versus linear and exponential trends. Financial crisis, GDP falls to exponential trend growth, too slow to support the prosperity. The current crisis, GDP will fall well below long-term trend growth, creating a wider wealth gap. This is very clear, this is absolute, and we have a big problem on our hands when they keep telling us we're going to grow out of it, but it is impossible. And this is the key right here. Not a goodbye. $7 of debt, $1 of GDP growth. This chart goes from 2009 up until the present, and it is very clear that they have been pumping in more and more and more, and the result is less and less. The IMF may understand that, but they're not willing to share it. I see the comments, I see the articles, I see the analysts, I see the talking heads, I see the suits and ties telling you day after day, but my goodness, it's so obvious. This right here is the most important chart for anybody who has stayed this long into the video. This is the take home. This chart here shows you the debt, deficits, and economic growth. Look at that red line. That's the 10-year average GDP growth. It's been declining. Interest rates have been falling throughout this period. It's supposed to be better and better and better growth, but guess what? It's absolutely the opposite. And understand, whatever they tell you in the mainstream, the suits and ties, all the nonsense distractions that are going on, usually it's the opposite. Eurozone deflation will push the ECB to act as soon as December, because apparently what they've done so far isn't enough. As I expected, Eurozone HICP contracted more than expected in September. The flash estimate showed a decline of 0.3% year over year. If confirmed, it would be the second consecutive drop and the largest decline since April 2016. Essentially, you could see the shape here on the chart. This has been a big problem since the financial crisis, which is around here, and this has been a trend. They cannot get the growth to happen in their inflation measures, largely because they're using the wrong measures. But pumping money into the system in the fashion that they do has never and will never result in what they are trying, or at least telling us, trying to accomplish. My friends in Canada, apparently we're going to have to pay higher taxes. Everything that's happened so far here in 2020 has cost a lot of money, and guess who has to pay for it? But I think more importantly than what's going to happen to our future, or what's going to happen to the economy, we should be focused on what's on television and what's going on in the media, because that's really what's important. And here, his hair is truly where our focus should be. Put all your attention on the hair. How fantastic this hair can be. Sure, it's not a furry furlough kitten, but it does give me confidence. That's all for this video. If you found it informative, hit that thumbs up button. When you do, you're supporting me. I want to thank you for that. If you want to learn how to sell stuff online, I'm talking about e-commerce. This is a skill that people should have. I teach you this for free while the other guys are charging $1,000 plus. Most people have not taken advantage of it. Oh well, check it out at theamazongps.com. If you want to learn all that which is in the financial system, I'm talking about everything from A to Z, you can get it in these two books. Yes, I said books. Very, very old school, I know, but if you're interested, check the link in the description if you want the audiobook instead, themoneygps.com. Wait a second, don't go anywhere. Have you seen this video? Lots of detail, a lot of data. Definitely check it out. Click it. I will see you there.